Hey everyone, what's going on? And thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Justin, and it's been a long time since I've made one of these since the Toronto Maple Leafs got eliminated in round one against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But with the draft coming up this week, with free agency starting next week, there's going to be a lot of news coming out soon. I can't wait to ramp things back up officially in the offseason. Congratulations to the Colorado Avalanche, by the way, on winning the Stanley Cup. But now it's time to look at what is to come next year for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that starts today. What I plan to do today is just take a quick outlook on what is this team pretty much going to look like as it stands right now for next season, some tweaks I would like to see, and what to expect maybe to come in free agency. We'll start by taking a look at the defensive group right now, because that seems to be pretty much set in stone right now. That was kicked off with a couple early signings with Mark Giordano to a 2-year deal, a very significant hometown discount that I was really excited to see, and then Timothy Liljegren signed to an extension as well. So that pairing stays together. They were great last year. I'm really happy that we were able to get both those settled. And that shores out the group aside from one major piece missing, and that's Rasmus Sandin. He's a restricted free agent. We need to get that piece signed. I don't want to hear any talks of an offer sheet coming for Rasmus Sandin. I don't want to hear any talks of the Leafs shopping his rights. I want that guy to stay on the Leafs. Now, there was a report earlier this week that he looks at this team and doesn't really see a spot for himself, and that's a little bit of a concern for myself, but it's been talked about a little bit. I think Jake Muzzin is a piece that would become a little bit expendable if you were to look at maintaining Rasmus Sandin on a longer-term deal. Jake Muzzin has $5.6 million cap hit. I love what he brings to this team. I've loved having him on the Leafs, but unfortunately, that spot might be pushed out for him. He's had a little bit of inconsistency with his health over the last little bit, and maybe you're able to get some assets back for that piece and you can slot Sandin in that role instead. But I do want to make sure that we get Sandin done. It's also important that we have foresight. I mean, Sandin and Liljegren are two young developing pieces that are only going to get better, and they fit very well in the Leafs system. You want to make sure that you have those pieces for the long term. If the Leafs do not win a playoff series next year, I do foresee some major changes to this team. That would put us only 1 year out of an expiring deal for both Matthews and Nylander. And if the Leafs don't win that playoff round next year, again, I can see some significant changes with that landscape of, having two major pieces on expiring deals. So you need to make sure that you're set up for the future no matter what. And Sandin and Liljegren are important parts of our back end. You need to make sure you get him signed. And with that said, you've got Riley, Brody, Liljegren, Giordano. You would have Sandin signed as well. And then maybe you bring back Lyubushkin, or maybe you sign someone else in free agency or call someone up from the Marlies. And that makes it so that you can maybe look at shopping Jake Muzzin. I think Justin Hall's $2 million needs to get off the books, and your defense is pretty much set from there. As far as the forwards go, still not too much work that needs to be done. You've got the core, obviously, of the big four. You've got Bunting signed for 1 more year on his deal. And you've got David Kampf along with a few other restricted free agents that maybe you look to bring back someone like Pierre Engvall, Andrzej Kasha. Those are guys that you've got control over because of the restricted status. And then you've got some unrestricted players like Ilya Mikheyev. What do you plan to do there? Apparently, he's asking $5.5 million. That's way too much. This is why I said last year at the trade deadline, honestly, I would have considered moving Ilya Mikheyev. He had great value at the deadline. He's a player that I didn't see being a significant piece for us in the playoffs. He ended up not being that with only 2 empty net goals in the entire series, both in the same game. And now he's looking for $5.5 million. So the Leafs just lose this player for absolutely nothing unless he decides he wants to come back for cheap. And even then, I don't know. You might want to change it up and look for someone different in free agency. From there, again, you're filling out some bottom 6 role players. A lot of that can be people being called up. Nick Robertson definitely needs a spot on this roster next year. If he can stay healthy, if he can perform to it, just give him a chance. And if he doesn't get that chance, then we've got to look at moving him at this point, give him a chance somewhere else. But I think he's in the roster. You've got people like Pontus Holmberg, Roni Hirvonen, who signed in Finland, but could come over and play. Bobby McMahon, someone that's been mentioned as of lately. And then obviously Steves and Nick Abruzzese. They will have spots on this roster. So those guys are interchangeable in the bottom 6. And then you look at maybe 1 or 2 guys in free agency that can also step in. And then Clifford and Simmons, They're getting old. They've got roles on this team, but I don't see both of them being in the roster on a consistent basis. Maybe they rotate in and out for each other. But again, that's an insignificant ask to just add bottom six players. The Leafs seem to do very well and picking up those players in free agency. Over the last few years, Kyle Dubas has gone for some older players with some veteran leadership. He's gone for some younger players like Andrzej Kasha, who had injury problems but ended up playing very well for us. So I don't see a concern with that at all. The one thing I would note is Alex Kerfoot. I do really like Alex Kerfoot. I love that he's kind of that Swiss Army knife for the Leafs, that he can play any position. But at $3.5 million, we've given him ample opportunity on this team to be a perfect left winger, especially for that Tavares line. And he just hasn't solidified that spot for himself. And I don't know how much longer you can continue to give him that leash. If he's going to be someone that's going to be bumped down to the third or fourth line, I don't see it working. Someone that I would be interested in free agency to take over that spot as that Swiss Army knife is someone like Max Domi. He's someone that I think would be interested in coming to Toronto. Obviously, he's got his ties with Ty, his father. And he's that kind of player that can play wing, he can play center, he can play power play, he can play penalty kill, and he can play on the second or third line. And perhaps he's willing to take $3.5 million or less. And perhaps he's that piece that just fits in super well with the likes of a John Tavares and William Nylander, or he's better on that third line role. That's someone that I'm interested in targeting this offseason, but again, no guarantee in that, and who knows if the Leafs are actually interested, but that's someone that sticks out to me. Regardless, I do think that it is time to start considering an Alex Kerfoot move. You need to start shaking things up with this team. You need to start making sure that these players are gelling with each other and fitting into their roles well. And while Alex Kerfoot has done that at times, and probably majority of the time, it's not consistent, and we need to make it so that this team is an actual contender for this year, and maybe that means a trade. And lastly, the most contentious topic, I guess, with the Leafs right now is goaltending. What are they going to do? Well, I think Peter Mrazek had a very bad season last year, even for his standards. I think he's a much better goalie than what he performed last year, and I would expect him to have a better season, but it's looking like that's not going to be with the Leafs. And watch, we're going to move him, and he's going to have a great season, and people are going to be up in arms on why did we get rid of this guy? But for the money that he's got as a backup goalie, I just don't see it working. He's not going to be our starter. That's an absolute fact. So it's looking likely that we're going to move him. I've got the philosophy personally that I would want a backup to be a young prospect, someone that's getting the opportunity to experience the NHL, get their reps in with the pro team, and groom their way into potentially being a starter or a 1B in the future. And to me, Erik Källgren did a good job with that last year. And whether that's Källgren or Woll, I think you can rotate in a backup goalie. Again, to me, if you're looking at a backup goalie as being a player that's going to save you and win you games in the playoffs, that's not a recipe for success. I know we saw examples of it, especially in this year's playoffs with a lot of starting goalies going down. But at the end of the day, the Colorado Avalanche won with their starting goalie in net. Vasilevsky was on the other side. If it was Brian Elliott in the net, who knows how Tampa would have done in the playoffs. And I know Francouz won games for Colorado, but it's just not a recipe for success to bank on a backup goalie being steady enough for the playoffs. You're just looking for them to be a serviceable piece in the regular season. And again, I think Källgren or Woll or whoever you want to put in there as a young prospect, that fits that bill. So now we're looking at a starting goalie. Who is it going to be? Well, there's been some conversation about John Gibson, but that would require a trade. That means assets going the other way. And then you're looking at a $6+ million goalie for what significant advantage is that? I think he's a great goalie. Is he that one piece that's going to get us a cup? I don't know. Perhaps he is, but that's a lot of money and a lot of risk and a lot of assets moved for a guess, right? It's taking a shot in the dark. And at this point with the Leafs, I don't know if you're really comfortable with making that decision. There's other free agent goalies that are on, a want list like Ville Husso, or I've heard that the Leafs are tied to Alex Georgiev, but I don't know about giving him a starting role. And he's a restricted free agent, so you'd need to trade for his rights. At this point, for me, all signs point towards bringing back Jack Campbell. He loves the team loves him, he loves Toronto. It's just about the money. And right now he's asking for somewhere in the likes of $7 million. No, absolutely not. We're not giving that kind of money. But if we can secure him for $5 million for a 3-year extension, and then if it doesn't work out during those 3 years, looking at shopping him, Maybe that's the solution. That's the route I would go, just because, again, there's not enough certainty in the free agent market or the trade market right now, and a goalie that's really going to step up for us. And I've heard, Matt Murray being rumored for the Leafs, and maybe that's a backup solution, but definitely not a starter. And even then, again, I don't want someone like Matt Murray as the backup. It just doesn't make any sense to me when you can have someone like Källgren again and start grooming him towards being a significant goalie in the NHL. So again, I'd like to see Jack Campbell sign with the Leafs, but that's up to Jack. At this point, he needs to come down with his ask. It's way too high at $7 million. Even $5 million is pushing it for a goalie that hasn't really proven himself. He proved it for the first half of the season. Second half sucked. I don't think he was the problem in the playoffs. He played pretty well. Only had a sub 900, I think, though. So he's got to come down in his ask. These Leafs as a whole need to start realizing that it takes team-friendly contracts to win a cup, and that's got to start this offseason, and it's got to be a cultural perspective where you're going to take a little bit less, but you're going to win here moving forward, and that leaks into when Matthews is up, leaks into when Nylander, Marner, Tavares are up. I want them all to have that mindset as well, and I would hope Jack Campbell sets the standard with that. I know Mark Giordano did when he took his 2-year deal at $800,000. He's clearly setting a standard that, you know what? I'm here to win. That's all I'm here for. I'm not here for the money. Hopefully we can set that tone this year. In all, it looks like the Leafs are pretty much just dealing with those outside edges. They've got the core. They've got the main pieces. They've got majority of this team locked up. The goaltending, obviously, you want to make sure that that's secure sooner than later. But then other than that, in free agency, we're really picking around the edges and trying to find a way to make this team a contender. So that's what I'm expecting. I'm not expecting too much, but at the same time, I don't really know who the players are that we're going to be targeting. I really have no idea what's up Kyle Dubas' sleeve, and I'm always very excited and happy to see what he does end up pulling off, because I think he does a great job in free agency. So what are your expectations? What do you like about this team? What are some pieces that you think about changing? What are your expectations for the draft and free agency? Again, lots of information, lots of news is set to come out. It's a very busy time in the NHL, so I'll be making more content here out. I'm really excited to be doing it, and I'll see you in the next video.